If you hear a fast, rhythmic clicking noise every time you turn your car's steering wheel, you need to pull over, shut the car off, and call a tow truck immediately. Continuing to drive on that sound is a quick trip to losing control of your car, and maybe losing a wheel altogether.
What is that awful groaning? And what is the difference between a simple, cheap fix and a warning sign that your car is about to become a pile of twisted metal? We're talking about the 4 most dangerous noises your car can make when you turn the wheel. These sounds aren't minor. They are screaming warnings from parts designed to keep your wheel attached and pointed the right direction. Ignoring any of these is the most expensive mistake you can make as a car owner. We're going to dive deep, explain the mechanics in simple terms, and make sure you know exactly how to diagnose this stuff before it lands you in a...
Imagine this. You're pulling out of a parking spot, turning the wheel almost all the way, and you hear it, a rapid mechanical click, 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 click sound. It only happens when you turn, and it speeds up or slows down with the speed of your wheel. It's loud, it sounds expensive, and it feels like the car is chewing itself up from the inside. Your stomach drops because you know a sound this definite, this mechanical, means a major component is failing. The challenge is, without knowing what it is, you don't know if you can safely drive to the mechanic or if you need to ditch the car right there. I'm telling you now, if it's that fast clicking sound, the choice is easy. Stop the car. The clicking sound is usually the death rattle of your constant velocity joint, or CV joint. And I want to take a moment to really explain what this part is and why it's so important that you stop driving as soon as you hear it starting to fail.
The clicking noise, failing CV joints. What the CV joint does and why it fails. Your CV joint is one of the most brilliant but most stressed parts of any modern front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive car. Think about it. The wheels need to receive power from the engine, and they also need to be able to turn left and right and move up and down over bumps. Your wheel is doing 3 things at once: getting power, steering, and dealing with the road surface. No simple, stiff rod can do that. The CV joint is what makes this complex dance possible. It's basically a ball and socket joint, full of smaller metal balls, steel bearings, that allow the axle to send rotational power to the wheel, no matter what angle the wheel is at. It's an engineering marvel, but it needs one thing to survive: grease. Lots and lots of thick, specialized grease. This grease is sealed inside a rubber boot, which looks like a black accordion wrapped around the axle shaft near the wheel. This boot is the CV joint shield. It keeps the grease in and the road debris, water, and dirt out. Now, the rubber is constantly flexing. After years and years of use, or maybe hitting a nasty pothole, that rubber boot will crack, tear, or completely split open. When that happens, the story is over for the CV joint, and the clock starts ticking very fast. The tear allows the thick, protective grease to spin out and fly away, and it allows water and tiny particles of dirt and grit to fly in. The grinding process. When the grease is gone, those tiny, precision-engineered steel ball bearings inside the joint start rubbing against each other and the joint housing without any lubrication. Instead of gliding smoothly, they are now grinding. It's metal against metal, and the heat builds up immediately. But worse than the lack of grease is the entry of dirt. Imagine taking fine-grained sandpaper and shoving it inside your car's most important turning joint. That's exactly what dirt and road grit do. Every time the wheel turns, the dirt is trapped inside and acts like a powerful abrasive, grinding down the steel ball bearings into a fine metallic dust. This process is accelerated dramatically when you turn the wheel, because that's when the joint is flexing the most and the internal parts are shifting, allowing the dirt to get into every single gap. The clicking sound you hear is the now damaged ball bearings slipping, catching, and jamming inside the joint's housing, because the metal is worn and the clearances are all wrong. The faster and sharper you turn, the more you hear that terrifying click, click, click noise. It sounds like a machine gun or maybe a bike spoke hitting a playing card, but much louder and deeper. The speed of the clicking is directly tied to the speed of the wheel, so if you turn slowly, you hear slow clicks. If you turn quickly, it's a blur of noise.
Why you must stop driving. When the CV joint wears down to this point, it's not just a noise problem, it's a total structural failure in progress. The internal components become so loose and chewed up that they can no longer hold the axle shaft securely in place. The failure is imminent and catastrophic. The absolute worst-case scenario is that the joint completely disintegrates while you are driving. This can happen in two main ways, neither of which is good. The axle snaps or pops out. The entire axle shaft can either break cleanly at the joint or pop out of the transmission housing. If this happens, your wheel loses all power instantly, and you will be completely stuck. You'll hear a very loud, final metallic bang, and the car won't move, even if the engine is running. The wheel becomes uncontrolled. The joint acts as a main pivot point. When it shatters, the wheel is suddenly no longer properly connected to the steering and suspension system. The entire wheel assembly can pivot violently, turning the wheel at a dangerous sharp angle and causing you to instantly lose control of the car. If this happens at highway speeds, or even while making a sharp turn, you are guaranteed to crash. That clicking sound is the last warning. You have maybe a few days of careful, straight-line driving before the part becomes totally unsafe, but truthfully, once the sound starts, you are operating on borrowed time. That's why the rule is, if you hear the loud, fast clicking when turning, stop the car. Tow it. A tow bill is nothing compared to a total crash or the cost of replacing the entire suspension and bodywork after the wheel lets go. It's an easy decision. The groaning noise. Power steering failure. Another incredibly common and dangerous sound you hear while turning is a completely different kind of noise. A loud, deep groan or high-pitched whine, especially when you turn the wheel nearly all the way to the end of its travel or when you are maneuvering in a tight parking spot. This isn't the rapid clicking of the CV joint. This is a low, struggling sound. The power steering pump struggle. This sound is coming from your car's power steering system. This system uses hydraulic fluid and a pump to help you turn the wheels easily. Without it, turning the wheel would be like a major arm workout, especially on heavy cars. The pump is an absolute beast, pushing thick fluid under very high pressure to assist your steering effort. The groan or whine is almost always caused by one of two things: low fluid or a dying pump. If the fluid is low, it's usually because of a leak somewhere in the system, a hose, a seal, or the steering rack itself. When the fluid level drops below the inlet tube inside the reservoir, the pump starts sucking in air along with the remaining fluid. Think of trying to drink a thick milkshake through a straw that has a tiny hole in it. You suck in mostly air, and it makes a loud, sloshing, gurgling sound. That's what the power steering pump is doing, but on a much louder and more mechanical scale. The air bubbles collapse when they go through the pump, and this lack of continuous, dense fluid causes the pump to struggle and heat up fast. The struggle is the groan you hear. If you check the fluid, it will often look like frothy, brownish liquid instead of clean, pink, red, or amber fluid. If the fluid is full, the noise is almost certainly a sign that the power steering pump itself is failing. The internal vanes and bearings are wearing out, and they are struggling to build the necessary pressure. The sound is a clear, mechanical complaint.
The danger of loss of assist. While a failing CV joint is a sudden crash waiting to happen, a failing power steering system is a disaster waiting to happen during an emergency maneuver. When the pump fails or the fluid runs out, you don't just lose the sound, you lose the power assist. The steering wheel will immediately become 10 times heavier, maybe more. You'll feel it right away. Maneuvering in a parking lot becomes a fight. The real danger, however, is on the highway or in an emergency. If you need to suddenly swerve to avoid something, like a piece of debris or an animal or another car, you will not have the speed or strength to turn the wheel fast enough to save yourself. Your split-second reaction time will be slowed down by the heavy, resisting steering wheel, leading to a much higher chance of a serious accident. If you hear this whine or groan and the steering wheel starts to feel heavier, you can carefully drive the car to a mechanic, but you need to avoid sharp, low-speed turns, and you need to be acutely aware that you are driving a car with a severe, looming handicap. The pump can seize up entirely, which could potentially cause the belt it runs on to snap, and that belt often runs your alternator and water pump, meaning a simple power steering problem can strand you and cause your engine to overheat. This problem is less immediate stop than the CV joint, but it is much more of a fix it this week or suffer the consequences problem. The clunking noise, tie rods, and ball joints. Sometimes when you turn the wheel or hit a bump while turning, you don't hear a click or a whine, but a deep, solid clunk. This is a lower frequency sound, a definite thud or knock. This sound often points to issues with the foundational parts of your suspension and steering system, specifically the tie rod ends or the ball joints. These parts are the connections, the arms and shoulders that hold the wheel assembly to the rest of the car's steering system. They are designed to move and articulate, but they're not supposed to be loose. When a joint gets loose, just like the CV joint, the ball joint is protected by a small rubber boot filled with grease. When this grease leaks out or the boot tears, the metal inside starts to wear down. But instead of clicking, the failure of a tie rod end or ball joint makes a clunk because it's a looseness problem. Imagine the ball joint like your hip joint. It allows your leg to move in all directions. If the ligaments and cartilage wore away, your leg would wobble in the socket before it eventually popped out. That wobble is the clunk you hear. Every time you turn, every time you hit a small bump, the loose joint shifts in its worn socket, and that metal-on-metal impact is the clunk. If a tie rod end fails, the front of the car feels very loose, like the steering is vague, and the clunk is heard when the wheel is turned sharply or rocked back and forth. The tie rods are what actually steer the wheel. If one of them breaks or pops off its stud, the wheel on that side is no longer connected to your steering rack. It can flop around and point in any direction it wants, independent of what the other wheel is doing. The catastrophic failure. This is where the clunk becomes just as dangerous as the clicking. A total ball joint failure is one of the most terrifying things that can happen to a car. When the joint separates, the entire bottom section of your steering knuckle and wheel assembly detaches from the lower control arm. There is a huge metallic screech, followed by an alarming thud as the suspension collapses. The wheel suddenly folds inward or outward, completely sideways, because the arm holding it up is gone. The car body drops down heavily onto the tire and fender. You are immediately skidding on the broken part, and the tire is now pointed entirely the wrong way. You have zero control. This failure often happens under stress, like going over a big bump, or, yes, making a sharp turn. If you are hearing a pronounced clunk when turning or going over bumps, especially at low speed, it is critical. You are not far from a catastrophic structural failure. This is another reason to stop driving immediately, or at the very least, drive at a snail's pace directly to the nearest safest repair shop and have the front end inspected by a professional who can physically shake the wheel and check for the play or looseness in those joints. The moment you feel that steering is vague, or you see the car pulling strongly to one side, you have gone past the warning sign and into the danger zone. The clunk is the warning that precedes the
roaring noise, bad wheel bearings. Finally, let's talk about a noise that is more of a constant companion but gets louder when you turn. The low, persistent roaring or humming sound that sounds like a jet engine from a distance. This sound points directly to a failing wheel bearing. The wheel bearing is the simple yet vital component that lets your wheels spin freely around the axle with almost zero friction. It's a set of hardened steel balls or rollers held in a race, again lubricated with grease and sealed. The sound test. A bad wheel bearing makes a noise that changes with speed. It's a low woom 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 sound that gets faster and louder as you accelerate. The key thing that connects it to turning is this.
The sound will usually get louder when you turn the car to the left and quieter when you turn it to the right. Here's the trick. When you turn the car to the left, the car's weight shifts to the right side of the car, putting more load on the right side wheel bearings. If the sound gets louder when you turn left, the bad bearing is on the right side. If the sound gets louder when you turn right, the bad bearing is on the left side. This simple test is the fastest way to confirm that the problem is a bearing and not something else. The danger: friction and heat. When the bearing fails, it's because the grease is gone and the internal rollers have started to grind down, just like the CV joint. But in a bearing, this grinding is happening constantly while the wheel is spinning. This grinding creates two major issues: massive heat. The friction generates immense heat. This heat can get so intense that it actually melts the internal components, and in some extreme, horrible-to-watch cases, it can be the source of a wheel fire. The heat spreads from the hub to the wheel, and if the grease becomes volatile, you can have a fiery failure. This isn't a common risk, but it is a severe risk that underscores the danger of driving on a bad bearing. Wheel seizure. The most immediate danger is that the inner parts of the bearing can seize up or completely disintegrate. If the bearing seizes, the wheel instantly stops rotating. Imagine you're driving at 60 miles per hour and one wheel decides to stop spinning and just starts sliding. The wheel locks, the car violently pulls to that side, and you lose control instantly. The force involved at speed means the car will spin or violently veer off course, a devastating scenario. Unlike the power steering issue, where you can limp home, the wheel bearing issue must be taken very seriously. The roaring or humming is a constant countdown. The second the bearing is past the point of no return, the wheel locks. You have no way of knowing exactly how long you have left. The minute the noise is clearly audible, it needs to be fixed. It's a time bomb, and you shouldn't be driving it on any high-speed roads. The danger is simply too great to risk the catastrophic seizure of a wheel. Climax or key moment. So let's bring it back to the absolute most critical warning. Out of all the noises, the groan, the clunk, the roar, the rapid, machine gun-like clicking when you turn is your signal to shut the car off right now. That sound is the metal on the inside of the CV joint slipping and failing under load, and once that sound is there, the component has lost its structural integrity. You are gambling every time you turn the wheel. Pull over, call the tow truck, and do not try to just make it home. A $100 tow bill is the cheapest insurance policy you will ever buy against a catastrophic failure that could cost you thousands in repairs or worse, cost you your life. If you hear that fast click, the time of guessing is over. The time of acting is now. Conclusion, summary. So we've covered the 4 sounds of a deadly turning issue. If you hear the rapid clicking when you turn, that's a failing CV joint, and you must stop driving immediately because the wheel can detach or lose power. If you hear a loud, heavy groaning or whining, that's your power steering struggling, and you need to get it fixed this week or you risk losing your ability to steer quickly in an emergency. If you hear a solid clunking noise when hitting bumps or turning, that's a loose ball joint or tie rod, which can cause your wheel to fold out from under the car. And finally, if you hear a low, steady roaring sound that gets louder when you turn one way, that's a wheel bearing that is ready to seize up and lock your wheel mid-drive. Be safe, listen to your car, and don't ignore these very serious warnings. Call to action. Subscribe to the channel right now for more ways to keep your car from falling.